Welcome back, everybody. This is my second podcast. I hope many of you already have seen the initial inaugural podcast of Justice Reinvestment. And that was with me, as you saw. And today I have a really special guest and friend, Miss Jenny Hardin, here with me today. Jenny and I have known each other for a long time. I think, Jenny, we graduated.
20 plus years in grad school together.
Yeah, grad school's where we met, right?
Yeah,
We're both master's level clinical social workers and have worked in this field for a number of years. And Jenny's my executive assistant now at the Caring Center of Wichita.
Yeah.
And we just every day get to run a lot of stuff up the wall with each other. And but a lot of the things, Jenny knows what my passion is, and hers is one of the same, that we really want to. My whole thing is reforming the criminal justice system to better be able to help people that have substance use and mental health disorders.
Right. I know for as long as I've known you, Pete, 20 plus years now, even in school, when you first told your story, it blew me away just to hear what the paths you had been down and how you turned your life around by wanting to be a social worker and give back to the community and people who struggle with substance use disorders. You just so inspired me. And to be here with you 20 some years later, knowing how deep this passion is for you to get the word out on justice reinvestment, it's just I love to see that passion from you, and you want to educate people, and I just love to watch you living this dream and doing what your soul's called to do. So I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Well, I'm honored that you are, and thank you. That really touches my heart in many ways. Um, so anyhow, Jenny kind of has some ideas and quite, just what's on your mind?
Let's jump right in. I think a good place to start for everybody out there is to talk about what is justice reinvestment. What does that look like? Can we define it for people? Let's start there.
Okay. We have a criminal justice system that I think for the most part is well-intentioned. It's just not well designed to help people that have substance use and mental health disorders. In my work, you guys know I spent 10 years of 25 years of a federal sentence in prison that I thank God got a presidential commutation of sentence. So,
Right.
It just went so far beyond the point of diminishing returns, and it turned into punishment.
Yeah.
Rather than rehabilitation. And really the question we really want, a central question we want to ask, Jenny, is what does it take to help people change their behavior?
Exactly.
Whether it's rehabilitation or you want to call it whatever, I'm going to call it behavior modification or a
Right.
change in lifestyle or, recovery or all these different aspects of what that is. But, I always think back in the old days, people would steal a car and whatever went on, and they could get arrested, and if they did that again, they might go to jail the first time, and next time they go to prison, right?
Right.
But people go in there for that, and they come out, and they kind of have a consequence that really can help them understand that's not a good idea. Well, let's just take this stat here. The National Institutes of Drug Abuse. This happened clear back in 2006. Whenever you and I were first starting, they had a stat then that hasn't changed that much now, which was that 95% of the people who go to jail or prisons, but really prison for drug and alcohol related crimes, end up relapsing back on drugs and alcohol, and 70% go back to prison. Now, we're not only, and we're going to talk about that, some of the reasons why that is, but one of the reasons is this is a physiological chemically induced brain disorder, and people have to have like exposure to symptoms. You have to be exposed to the environment where the symptoms occur.
Right.
And and people can use drugs in jail and all that, but if we're talking about people that want to get clean, get out, they have all the stressors and what they get released to, and generally what they primarily get released to is a whole bunch of barriers and obstacles, like
what?
Like a felony.
Sure. Yeah.
And Jenny, today, like 90% of the jobs, at least, that people apply for are online. So as soon as they go on there and the box is there and they have to check that felony box, they're largely excluded. So that's one of the main things they could do. They very often don't have identification.
Just simple things sometimes, right?
Yeah,
The
right.
simplest things.
The
Yeah.
most simple things. And you know, they don't, then you talk about employers that would hire them, you talk about housing. So
Mhm.
what I really kind of want to talk about, you and I talk about this. You've done some research on Scandinavian countries.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Pete. You find that Norway, Sweden, Germany, Netherlands, that they are so progressive with the things they try. In fact, they don't employ a lot of punitive, law enforcement people. They employ more social workers, I discovered, than anything. Where from day one, they're in a more, able to wear their regular clothes, cook meals together, do the work release thing. I mean, it's just so rehabilitative, and
Yeah.
not with this heavy stigma that can come with the US, where we're incarcerating so many people, and yet
Not
look at
not
the recidivism
And
rates, you
not to
know?
mention, which I know very well, that 10 years and what that prison experience is like when you're in there.
Yeah.
So
Talk about that a little bit.
let's just talk about it. Before I go there, I want to just I about 5 years ago, maybe six, seven, yeah, I don't know. I went to every one since. I went to a
Mhm.
conference down in Leavenworth area, but it's in Kansas City, Leavenworth, but it's based out of Lansing. It's called Reaching Out from Within, and it's a group of inmates that are involved in this program. They got called the Blue Book, and the people that go through this program, the inmates, they have a recidivism rate that's around 20% when the
Mhm.
average norm might be about 70.
Okay.
But I went to this conference, and it was a symposium, they called it, and a returning citizens symposium.
Hmm.
Imagine that, not returning offenders.
Right. The
And
language matters though, doesn't it? I
yeah,
mean,
and
enormously.
it's like saying addicts. It's like, no, they're patients. They're people that have a medical condition
Right.
that has disrupted their critical brain structures, which happen to be part of a medical condition, just
Right.
like, from your behavioral health work.
Yeah.
And so anyhow, there was this gal there named Sue Ellen Freed. Now, Sue Ellen was a prison volunteer.
Okay.
And for years, I thought she was a nun because she was just as pure as the driven snow. Now I was raised by nuns, so I don't know about that, but I had a lot of Catholic grade school, trust me.
Uh-huh.
But anyhow, Jenny, no, what but then I found out one day, I figured out she wasn't, because she had watched the program here in the United States, and the way people were treated, and mainly the length of time they were in prison and what happened when they were in there. And she ended up seeing her daughter in Germany. That's how somebody told me she wasn't a
Oh,
nun. Okay,
I gotcha.
probably not, right?
Okay.
And so anyhow, um, she had brought this guy back. So she was amazed. Her sister introduced her to this guy. He was a social worker. His name was Axel. I forget his last name, doesn't matter. But anyhow, they brought Axel into the German prison system that, by the way, had about exactly the same statistics we have,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
today that I cited earlier. And it really about 70% recidivism rate.
Mhm.
And they brought him in and said, "What would you do to change our prison system?
Mhm.
We have these terrible outcomes, and what do you think would be a more effective way to help people change behavior, in essence?"
Right.
And he started looking at it and he said, practically everything you're doing is wrong. If I
Mhm.
were to design a program that really had to evaluate how to help change behavior, about everything you're doing is wrong.
Right.
So first of all, you have this adversarial relationship between your guards
Right.
and your inmates, basically the
Right.
captives and the captors.
Mhm.
He said, so the first thing I would do is take the guns away from the
Mhm.
captors,
Mhm.
and I would have people dress. And the first thing we would do is have people come in and do a do a complete mental health evaluation
Right.
and discharge summary in the same time, because we would
Oh.
evaluate what the problem is, what
Mhm.
your problems are and the reason you got here. And we would look at life experiences and do more like trauma informed care, and
Yeah.
what were the origins of all this,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And address that, and then we would have a treatment plan for you, and they would be uh, regular sessions, regular counseling sessions,
Mhm.
regular therapy, and work on these things from week to week or whatever time between their sessions. Secondly, we would have people that had residents. Okay,
Yeah.
they all have their own key, and they all dress in normal clothes because they're here. Them being here is their punishment.
Mhm.
We shouldn't be sending people here to be punished. Their punishment is being removed from society.
Right.
And I used to wonder that too, Jenny, 5 years into my 25-year sentence,
Mhm.
hey, I've really been making or made the changes incarceration was intended to make. So
Mhm.
what the hell's the point?
Yeah.
But anyhow, what they were looking at was then we have to have people doing something productive with their lives.
Mhm.
So they had all this collaboration with community and had people going from their residences in a prison setting
Mhm.
out to their job, and they were employed.
Yep.
Okay, and they came home every day. A lot of them cooked for themselves, did the whole thing. They weren't just totally dependent on
Mhm.
their captors, right?
Right,
And the
right.
disenfranchisement and all of that that goes with, and where some people just become enabled, and they have a sense of entitlement
Mhm.
with that, right? And
Mhm.
we're teaching them that.
Right, right. It's kinda
And
counterproductive, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just so anyhow. They also allowed conjugal visits
Mhm.
because to them it was really important to change this recidivism rate
Mhm.
of how we treated the people when they're there, but also that we maintain family connection when they
That was
got
big with the Scandinavian programs I read, that the connection with family and maintaining that, preserving that, because it was a big part of their recovery journey and rehabilitation journey, you
right,
know?
and that they stayed part of that nucleus,
You
right?
bet,
And
you
that when they
bet.
got out, they had that kind of support,
Mhm.
and they were able to maintain their relationships. They didn't, their marriages, their relationships with their kids.
Mhm.
So they did all they had this whole approach to it this way. The guards were there basically just to monitor. They didn't have guns.
Right.
The residents, and we're going to call them
Mhm.
residents. That's what the people
Yep,
in reaching out from within did. Okay,
yeah,
they're residing here, right?
yep,
We don't need to say that they're inmates, and we don't need to say that they're convicts,
right.
and definitely, by labeling them offenders, which
Yeah,
we do,
mhm.
right? It's just
Just the
such.
stigma of that isn't conducive to healing and recovery at all,
No, no, it
and
just, there's something wrong with you really bad. You're an offender.
right, right, and
And
there's
and
all this shame with it and things that don't help people rehabilitate, you know?
no, so they turned that in essence, they turned that around from a program that
Mhm.
had to about 20, they reduced the recidivism rate to 20 to
It's
25%.
a big, big
From
drop.
65.
Yeah.
Okay, now Jenny, they did spend about two to two and a half times
Mhm.
more money incarcerating them. But
Mhm.
if you take a look at the product, the end product,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know, I remember when we were in college at one time, I just loved uh, Paul Cromwell. He was the director of the criminal justice program there, and he
Okay.
he told me he used to be on the head of the. He was on the Texas parole board, and he asked me one day when I came in to see me, Pete, do you know how lucky you are to be here? Because he couldn't believe there was such a thing as somebody getting a presidential commutation of sentence. But
Right.
you know, it was just like the whole the whole way that and so he had me talk to one of his classes.
Yeah.
And I did talk to several of them, but a lady was in there one time and she said, "Well, I think we treat them too good." And I said, "Okay, what do you propose?" And she had, blah, blah, blah. And I said, "Well, like, have you ever heard the theory of a junkyard dog?
Mhm.
And it's how you treat that. Why is that he a junkyard dog? Well,
Yeah.
it really doesn't have any more to do. He's not nice. He hasn't been treated well.
Right.
So who do you want sitting in that bus beside you or, your neighbor when they get out? Because 85, 90% of the people that are in prison are getting out.
Yeah.
And so what kind of a product are we turning out when they're in there, okay?
Mhm. Mhm.
So that whole thing really just it resonated with me, and every year I kept going back there, and I kept thinking, I wanted to write my book on, but I wanted to propose something
Mhm.
different, right? A book, everybody
Right.
has a story,
Right,
but if I
right.
don't have a solution to something at the end of it, then what's the point?
You bet, you
A-
bet, yeah.
And
It's interesting because they start with some of those countries with, like you mentioned, to sit down with them, the workers will eat the meals with them, it's a very communal
yeah, communal
setting,
would
and that
be
has a whole different feel, and they start from the beginning, it sounds like, trying to, "Let's start now working on your job and your employment. Let's work on housing," so that the goal is to get those things in place
while we're working
when
on
the
yourself.
and we're dealing dealing with the dual diagnosis, the trauma, whatever else is part of that whole bag, right?
Yeah.
But to get them to the place of success, able to live successfully, and discharging them from this model with the things in place that they're going to need to keep from coming back and doing a revolving door here, right?
So how did we get to the place of like sending somebody? And look, guys, I'm not, I worked really hard to get to prison. So let's just, give me
Right,
credit, right? Where
right,
credit's
right,
due. I just didn't know I was going to be there that long, right?
right,
So how did
exactly.
the question we might ask, how this whole thing come about?
Yeah, yeah, let's talk about that.
It really was like in the 80s, and the
Mhm.
Just Say No campaign, but really we
The
had,
war on drugs.
yeah, with
Mhm.
kind of a crack epidemic,
Yep.
crack cocaine. And, everybody was in both sides of the aisle were like, we just need to be, wasn't harder or smarter, it was harder on crime. So they came up with this crazy thing called mandatory minimums and the drug war, which ends
Okay.
up being, like a war on our own people.
Yeah.
And here we are, same war. I don't know what it's been, but 40, 50 years later, something crazy.
Mhm.
And it really is, it's still horrible.
Right.
And the outcomes are horrible. And so, our whole criminal justice system is based around this punitive jail, prison, incarceration type mode. But Jenny, over the years since, and I have a police officer friends that we've talked about, and there's this kind of this mix that's coming up in all this with social workers and law
Mhm.
enforcement,
Right.
that they're looking at the deeper level. What do we have in Wichita? What's that called? ICT or
Mhm. Mhm.
the EMS and the cop and the social worker
Right.
go to these scenes sometimes and
Yep.
kind of right from the
Kind of
jump.
direct intervention,
Yeah,
just
and
right
right from
there.
the jump, they're looking at which would be the best avenue to take.
Exactly. That intervention and dialogue with people, just chatting with them sometimes.
And then kind of saying, okay,
Mhm.
figuring out what the problem is,
You bet.
and let's just don't even talk about the whole horrific cost that we have every time of booking them in and out of jail, running them through the court system, running up their fines. These people are already marginalized financially and
Exactly.
every other way you can imagine. So we're
Mhm.
mainly just kind of putting them over here, and all of a sudden, we're having people that are just learning to live outside the law. Now,
Yeah.
I've heard legislators say, "Well, that's their choice." Well, no, some of it's your these policies that are not designed to
Mhm.
really truly help people out.
Yeah.
Um, so, but I look at it this way: we're not going to do what Scandinavian countries and other European countries have done, like
Mhm.
we've talked about. We've already had
Mhm.
this drug war, so we got to ride the horse or the ship we're on, the horse we rode here, okay?
Right, right.
So how do we start changing that? Well, one of the ways I've seen that change here and that I work with is the Sedgwick County Drug Court um,
Mhm.
from 2008 to 11, the inception of it. And, and I want to say that along the way, Jenny, some of our podcasts down the road, planning on having, my senior clinician, of 10 years, Jennifer
Right.
Mackey, that's a former police officer herself, that,
Mhm.
gravitated toward more of the solution with being a
Mhm.
substance abuse counselor and
Right.
then a clinician. And now she's a social worker and teaching at
Mhm.
college and working in the high schools and working on all levels. So she
Mhm.
can talk about that as well as Maggie
Right.
McIntyre, that's a DA for Sedgwick County.
Mhm.
And in 2009 or so, through Mike Jennings, invited me to present a 5-part series on the neuroscience of addiction that I
Hmm.
mentioned a little bit in my last podcast.
Right. Those are
So
gonna be some great upcoming episodes, Pete. That's exciting.
it's just so
Yeah.
much,
Yeah.
so much fun,
So
just
many
so.
different ways you can go with this
Yeah, right.
discussion. Yeah.
Right. And that's the problem thank you, Jenny, because
Mhm.
the problem with the whole drug war thing is it doesn't understand this is a physiologically, chemically induced brain disorder,
Right.
and that we have to get people,
Mhm.
intervention. But,
Mhm.
like Dr. Nancy Insko that helped me with this whole thing,
Yeah.
she said that the research, she was a former, warden of a maximum security prison, did that for 11 years and then quit, said this was an exercise in futility and really basically making people that were already marginalized, mental illness, severe persistent mental illness, worse. But she
Mhm.
figured out, from that about 11 days was a max that people gained a benefit out of incarceration. You know,
11 days, huh?
and what we're talking about here, everybody, just so you know, I'm not completely crazy, and I'm a wacko liberal, and I might be a little bit the liberal part, but hopefully not a wacko liberal. But is that people need intervention,
Mhm.
and that can be that can be part of it. But I've seen Sheriff Easter here locally, and even Mark Bennett and others talk about, sheriffs say, we have to separate those that we're mad at from those that we're afraid of, and for good reason.
Mhm.
Listen, there's a lot of people that I want over in the bricks and mortar, right?
Mhm.
But there's a whole nother group of people that I would suggest to all of you is a larger group of people that would be much better served in a therapeutic community.
Mhm.
By that, I mean a community, it's similar to community corrections here, but it's really not. Okay. It's a place to where they come and it's the same model that we're talking about in Europe, right? What
Yeah, yeah, we do some things well in this community. You and I have talked about that. Some things work. Maybe what can we do better though? There's always that room for let's improve it. Let's go further, you know?
Well, I say one of the things that just you talk about justice reinvestment. Well, Nancy and I presented one time
Mhm.
to the Sedgwick County Commissioners here, and they were considering building a whole nother addition to the Sedgwick County Jail, which I and her both opposed. Now, I was really looking at like this from, the addiction, from the substance use disorders and
Mhm.
this disease thing. She was looking at it in terms of we need to change the configuration. We should have these configurations should be cubicles in an area where everybody's much safer because everybody's exposed. And we
Mhm.
have a very open therapeutic environment. People are going to, whether it's domestic violence or classes for anger management or substance abuse, but we're
Mhm.
connecting them with the community and jobs and employers. And one thing that can blow people away, they say, well, these guys, they can do this, they're felons. There's something I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that sometimes people that are felons like Pete, I remember about 5 years in, and I was looking at the night job as a maintenance guy for McDonald's was something I really was relishing.
Mhm.
Okay. But we want a chance to work. We want a chance to prove
Yeah.
ourselves and turn our life around. And so we're looking at people that are in this situation. So Nancy, was really about this whole thing of changing that configuration and hooking them up to the community. And we'd have graduated sanctions. And Jenny, what we would eliminate is
Mhm.
booking all these people into jail, out of jail. It's the same insanity of like the driving on suspendeds, okay?
Right, right.
You don't have money to pay the fine, maybe a crime of poverty, maybe you should have, maybe some responsibility involved. But a lot of people, as we know, people we work with, they got anxiety through the roof.
Yeah.
So what do? Escape and avoid.
Mhm.
Okay. And then pretty soon they're having to go to work, do whatever, and they get another DUI.
Mhm.
And so this was one of I mean, not DUI, they get another driving on suspended.
Suspended. Okay.
Completely different thing.
Right.
And so then they get this driving on suspended. They get booked again in jail. Their fines went from a 500 to 1,000. They can't get their driver's license back until they pay the full $1,000. And God bless her, Senator Oletha Faust-Godot
Mm.
and Pilar Pedroza and some other people from Cake TV. But Oletha and I worked on it for 12 years, okay, and along with some other people that deserve to be mentioned in this too, and finally got a law passed that allowed people that have a suspended license to gain a restricted license as long as they provide proof of insurance registration and pay monthly on their fines, okay?
Mhm.
So we turned these people that were, basic, that we were kind of forcing them to live outside the law, right?
Right.
Into law-abiding citizens.
Yeah.
And crazily, Virginia did this one year. They went and pardoned everybody, pardoned, okay,
Uh-huh.
commuted, but pardoned. In
Right.
this case, they expunged people's fines for their driving on suspendeds and put them in a program, which we have a program similar to that today in Wichita called
Oh,
the WARP program,
okay. I
Wichita
didn't know
Area
that.
Recovery Program. It's recovering your driver's license, part of this
Okay.
legislation, but this allows people to work and pay their fines and be a part of society. Well,
Mhm.
in Virginia, they changed their whole their coffers went overboard that year from
Mhm.
putting law-abiding citizens now back to work and paying taxes. So
Wow.
these are just some of the things that
Success can happen, right? I mean, it's just a powerful story of what you can do. Just some people come together and say, we need to do this, we need to change this, or give it a try. and it works well sometimes, right?
Yeah, if we look at it from the bigger, we got to look at the bigger picture.
For sure, for sure.
Now, like, let's just talk about what the prison environment's like. When I spent 10 years there, it's the inmate and the convict, right? That's the whole thing. And that's where you looked at. And the captive versus the captors. Well, I got to tell you that's about as adversarial an environment that is absent in those prisons over there or this therapeutic community. This is insanity whenever you've got to plot and all of a sudden you have these twisted, criminal beliefs, these twisted, this convict mentality and all this crap that we're breeding in these places. And my dear friend, in 10 years I spent there, I seen so many people that came in there as people that had substance use disorders, heavily dependent on drugs and alcohol, turn into criminals, right? I mean, they had a criminal mindset because that's what you had to have to survive.
To survive, right? It was survival. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was the inmate liaison between the staff and the inmates, right? And the residents, I'm going to say.
What was
right?
that like?
Well, it gave me some great skills for my life after, and they called me the mayor of Inglewood, right? They said I was political, right? But I have to tell you that I look at it like I do the Wichita Intervention Program now, and it's a really eclectic group. And I had a medical provider come up to me one time in between classes, and he said, "How do you do this, Pete? This is about the most eclectic group." I go, "Bro, I spent 10 years in federal prison. I was kind of like a head of inmate organizations and programs." And, so it taught me how to kind of meet everybody where they're at.
You bet.
And that's, I think, some of what we do, so...
So how do we begin to help people change their behavior? Because at its core, it sounds like that's what you're talking a lot about. How do we change and shape behavior in a meaningful way?
Well, for one thing, we know how do we most effectively, efficiently, and humanely.
Yeah.
We've talked about that.
We really need that third one, don't we?
We need that third one. That's probably the answer right
could
there.
Be number one, right?
That probably is number one. First, we're going to look at it most efficiently here. First,
exactly.
But effectively, and that's really going to be the number one thing. Meeting people where they're at. Really, that's the whole part of assessing, just like we do in therapy.
Yeah.
With our patients, Jenny.
Yeah.
And so. And then we need to look at what is the point of diminishing returns. I talked about that earlier, and I think that's a really big thing we look at. But anyhow, just here's what I think people wouldn't get: that positive reinforcement is 3 times more effective to help people change their behavior than is punishment or consequences.
Okay.
And in, I don't know what year this was done by Ed Latessa and the folks at University of Cincinnati. They have a really top-notch criminology department, criminal justice department, and a criminology degrees there. And anyhow, what they did was they took a population in Memphis, Tennessee, that was really in a pretty much maximum security prison, and they tried both of those approaches. Okay, and these guys have been like, if you don't do this, you're going to get this and this and this, and what do? They do the same thing, and it's all about that rather than like if I had my brothers. The first thing, some years ago, I was invited to go into the El Dorado State Prison.
Okay,
and I got to go in there and present my I want to say podcast, but it really wasn't. It was my PowerPoint.
Okay.
On the neuroscience of addiction. And just to tell you folks out there, as a biological, physiological, psychological, and sociological chemically induced brain disorder. Now, I said a hell of a lot right there, but as a disease. So, they're not, the number one thing they needed to understand from my perspective was, let's understand what we're coming out to, and that you're going to have all these triggers, you're going to have all these stressors, and you're going to have all these exposures. Now, I know you all want to be with a woman again, but that's not near as doing drugs is a lot easier, quicker reward than that. Okay. Right. And it's a stress reliever. It's all of that. Okay.
Right.
And so people need to understand, number one, that they have this disease. And that needs to be the foundation for all of that. and then understanding the different things, just like our people in group do, our people in therapy do, what your triggers are. And we need to have them really, Jenny, we should be doing drug courts, on the front end of, okay, like first of all, in federal prison, like before I ever went there, now I probably earned some other time, but for a lot of people, we should be doing drug courts in the face of that. And then if they don't, we give people that carrot and stick approach, but we put them in a therapeutic environment. And like the Sedgwick County Drug Court and the one here in Wichita, the city. I mean, these are great programs that I call are a therapeutic, collaborative justice in a therapeutic
environment,
right?
Okay.
Yeah. A therapeutic alliance.
Yes.
Yeah, we had all these different factions. Like we had the DA's office with Maggie. We had the public defenders. We had Judge Kisner. We had Tom Struble, the Sedgwick County Drug Court probation, and his team of probation officers. I had my counselors. That was the whole team. And we all figured out every week, what do we have to do to help these people change their behavior?
Wow. Isn't it beautiful when you can see that kind of collaboration against,
And you're all in the same thing. How do we people change?
How do we do this?
How do we do this, right?
And how do we do it better? How do we help people actually get
well?
What
is actually effective?
You bet. And it worked. You found that it worked pretty well and had just a beautiful example of what a community can do.
Yeah, and these
if they
are
come
all
together.
And people, believe it or not, guys, most people I talk law enforcement, they want people to change their behavior.
Yeah.
And some of them don't like this at all, and they're stuck with this environment. They're stuck with having to continually arrest homeless people. That's senseless whenever they're just going to put them in jail and run up a fine. And you give them 10 minutes, they're down panhandling, they get some money for drugs. That's all they give a shit about, okay? Because that's what's got them wired. That's wired their brain.
Right.
So we have to teach people that's the number one thing I would say about, how do we do this? And, that would be the decriminalization of homelessness.
Yeah.
See, that's just one of the starts about justice reinvestment that works in the broader perspective of how do we take this into the community, right? What are some things that we can do there?
Right.
And, another thing as a society that we need to do is understand this so we quit personalizing.
Yeah.
We need to understand rather than personalize substance use disorders, because what people do is, they see this and it's and this is reflected in their behavior, but what they don't understand is this is due to chemical changes in the brain and the actual structural changes of the brain. Because addiction is a disease that disrupts critical brain structures that control judgment, decision-making, and behavior.
So half the battle is just educating people, both, patients, clients, the community at large, about that it is a disease that needs to be treated, and get rid of the shame language and the things we do that don't do a damn thing to help people get well or rehabilitate.
No,
there's so much shame and blame and judgment, and people just don't.
I mean,
quite get
I
it.
have some patients sometimes saying, like I had a guy the other day that was, and they were just talking about, the whole thing with the addicts and this and that,
Right.
and the whole thing. And I'm like, okay, we don't use that language here. We're dealing with patients that have a medical condition. That's what we really want people to know. And this isn't any different,
Yeah.
like people might be surprised to understand that, people have about the same relapse rates with, or even higher relapse rates with asthma and hypertension than they do with substance use disorders. But my dear friend, I think you pointed this out to me. What was the 50 million people in this country have a substance use disorder? How many people out of that did you tell me were getting help?
Oh my gosh, it's just we barely touched the
It
surface
was
of
about 10%.
that iceberg.
48 million, it was about 10%.
They say within a room of 10 people, that maybe 1 in 10 might get the treatment they need. I mean, that's just staggering when you think about it.
When you think about any other disease we would have a public national
If it was diabetes, we're dealing with it, we're addressing it. Why can't we look at substance use issues the same way?
Yeah.
It needs to be treated like any other medical condition.
And that starts with education.
It
So,
does.
that I think would be one of the, Helen Keller, you know how much I love her, and she's a social worker. I didn't
Yeah.
know it, but her statement of tolerance is the greatest result of education, or we could
Yes.
turn that into education equal tolerance, and
Mhm.
then that would actually turn that personalizing,
Mhm.
understanding into, rather than personalizing substance use disorders.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
using that approach right there.
Mhm.
So, like,
Mhm.
there's just so much of this stuff too that we're going to be talking about that has to do with mental health.
Mhm. Right, dual diagnosis, the trauma-informed care we've talked about, and
Yeah.
people have so much that's part of the person, and, we're dealing with substance, but we're trying to address these other things that can absolutely, keep them, get them right back into the prison system again.
Like, people come to me and say, well, I got some anxiety, this and that, but I just have it or whatever. And then I start going back there, and we get back to their childhood, right?
Right,
Or
right,
we get by and they just tell me some horrible things that are insane
right,
that happened to them and different things. Well, right there was all anxiety is fear based, creates automatic negative assumptions
right.
unless we can master that. And
Mhm,
and so this grows, and then we have depression, and
mhm,
those are two things that are rampant in our society today.
right,
So that's why at the Caring Center of Wichita we do co-occurring treatment. I don't know
mhm,
how to do anything else. We see
mhm,
people individually every week for
mhm,
their therapy, and then a good many of those same people that have the co-occurring, they're in groups where we meet them where they're at, and we're very eclectic about whatever their avenue to get there is, or maybe that isn't their avenue,
mhm,
and they're doing better or feel better about therapy, or maybe
mhm,
they're going out in the community and they're getting AA and that's what they're doing. But there's just so many different
That's
paths.
part of what I love about the Caring Center. I think we're unique in that regard, Pete. It's so eclectic. It's so meeting people where they're at, and I think that's why we see so much success with our clients getting well, getting better, functioning better,
Well,
managing triggers, all the things that we know need
yeah,
to happen.
feeling better about themselves, right?
Exactly, and
And
without this shame stuff, we let them do it in a way that preserves their dignity, their unique experiences, all of that. We honor that.
well, if we get away from the shame and guilt, we help people learn and embrace vulnerability.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, that goes so far in terms of healing and recovery. No matter what you're in recovery for, right? It's the
Yeah.
heart and soul of how people get well.
People tell me, they're an ego. I mean, I don't know how many times I hear, people are narcissists or whatever. And maybe that's way overused, just like people saying
It
people are
is.
bipolar, right?
Right, right.
They really don't know. But anyhow, it is so, I see, well, it's just basic insecurity. Okay. So a person's ego often is related to their insecurity.
Mhm.
And that's often related to their inability to have the courage to be vulnerable enough to look at themselves,
Mhm.
right? I
Right, or be transparent about things they've been through and just leaning into vulnerability. Wow, it's just powerful stuff, especially with the group work you do, and
Jenny, just think about, on the first podcast I talked about, the last time I smoked marijuana and when I was in federal prison, and I just, overcame with shame and guilt, thinking
right.
about how I screwed my life up coming from a good family and screwed my life up that horrifically. And then to a number of years later in 2006, get this understanding of the neuroscience of addiction as a
Yeah.
disease and begin understanding it isn't what's wrong with me, it's what happened to me in
Mhm.
terms of that disrupt, and have that, and
Exactly.
and I tell you what, Jenny, I just blocked that out, right? Once I had that, it's funny how all those years, that was just too much shame and guilt for me to master.
Yeah.
I just was swimming in it. I remember lying in that prison bunk bed, looking up at
Yeah.
that fluorescent light in that gymnasium we were stuck in, and just, like it was yesterday, you can tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's shame and guilt, and so justice reinvestment really has to do with overall changing the configuration,
Mhm.
and changing our systems,
Mhm.
and getting people from having to quit putting people in frickin' jail that don't need to be in jail, put them in a therapeutic community. Don't put them in with people that's going to make them worse, right? Or they have
Mm.
to be worse to
Right.
survive,
Or
right?
worse yet, they come out with more criminality than when they entered the system,
I
and
mean,
that's
it
not what
just
we want.
no, it's just this whole mentality. It spreads to the streets. I used to watch a direct correlation with prison lingo and the kids lingo. you know, and
Mhm.
in the you know, hoods and the communities,
Right.
this is all intertwined, and that's kind of part of what
Mhm.
we're breeding. And I
Mhm.
found that, you know, when you treat people with positivity and you get them to see their value and you treat them with value,
Mhm.
that you get value.
Right, and you see success more often. Yeah, a lot of punishment doesn't always heal people or rehabilitate anything, and I just like the way you approach it at the Caring Center because we see people just that that joy in them again, that I can enjoy my life, I can be well, and this hope that replaces that shame and the things that kept them stuck, you know?
You know, some of the things that sometimes I looked at, you know, different ways that, you know, thinking about all the different types of podcasts that
Mhm.
you know, could come up with you know, with all this stuff with justice reinvestment,
Right.
and it involves law enforcement.
Mhm.
It involves like the district attorneys. It's going to involve sheriffs. It's going to involve
Mhm.
legislators, but it's going to involve educating people.
That's what you're most passionate about, Pete, I think, is the educating people, helping people understand things that may be hard to wrap around or even difficult to talk about, but it's meaningful discussion that needs to happen to shape communities, to help people hear this podcast and feel hopeful that, you know, I can be well. I have this condition, like any medical condition. It can be treated. There are people that care and are
Right.
gonna meet you with the
And
dignity and
let
respect
Yeah, and let's
to
start looking
do
at the
it.
length of the sentences that we're giving out. Okay,
Sure.
let's really design these like they do there.
Mhm.
What is your problem? What can we do? What's the environment we can put you in? You know,
Mhm.
this is what I mean, justice reinvestment. Take
Right.
this same astronomical amount of money we're investing in to long-term incarceration that is
Yeah.
proving to be counterproductive, counter-effective,
Mhm.
right, in terms of
Mhm.
recidivism and everything, and just change the whole model, you know, over
Yeah.
time with how we treat people. And,
Mhm.
you know, the bottom line is Pete Ninemire needed intervention. And the majority of people sometimes that are involved in or justice involved, they needed intervention too.
Mhm.
It's just what we do with that intervention and how, you know, how that intervention takes shape.
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
kind of like the reconfiguration of the criminal justice system and kind of getting back to the front end of this where that drug war ship is going in this crazy Black Sea.
Right.
And now we start turning it around to understanding that addiction is a disease. And it's
Mhm.
often correlated with mental health problems, and let's address that, start meeting the people where they're at there, and
Mhm.
put them in a really therapeutic environment that is about a therapeutic
Mhm.
alliance in
Mhm.
collaborative justice.
Mhm. And very strengths-based too. It sounds very
Yeah,
like a
very.
very strengths-based approach and
So,
yeah.
so anyhow, I've really enjoyed
This
our
has been great. Yeah, I've really learned a lot, and I think a lot of our listeners are gonna absolutely enjoy hearing
Well,
your
I
personal
couldn't have
experience.
anybody that knows me better and along for the ride, and,
Yeah,
you know, talking about this, that knows, you know, me, but knows what our overarching goal are. We're in the same place.
absolutely.
So we're looking
Absolutely.
forward to the next one with Jen Mackey.
Okay.
And Jen is going to talk about social work and law enforcement,
Mhm.
and she's going to just talk about the school system policies and some of the things she sees with her kids, and, you know, different ways that we can
Mhm.
approach that. And I have
Mhm.
a lot that I'm going to save from now
Mhm.
till then.
Well,
So
that's gonna be great. I know with Jen's background and knowledge, it's gonna be a really good discussion that folks can look forward to.
yeah. So, and I think, you know, guys, I really like this better than my first one by a long shot.
Oh, it's
This
fun.
one's not all about me. This is about the community and
Right.
changing and reshaping society for the better. And
You
Jenny
bet.
and I are very much about that. And we know so many other people that are in the same vein. So, hey, join me for the next podcast of Justice Reinvestment. Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you all very much.